Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, although I did consider for a while calling myself square brackets name of presenter, close square brackets, but I thought that might just be a little bit too meta. And that's a hefty clue as to one of the shows we're going to be talking about today in this episode, because now is the time for us to look back at the 2016 Edinburgh Festival Fringe. It closed yesterday, which was the Bank Holiday Monday here in Britain, and, as I've said so often before, it's the largest arts festival in the world. Now, last week you heard short extracts from a number of interviews that I conducted whilst I was at this year's Fringe, talking to people behind and about musical theatre. Well, as from now, for the next few weeks, we're going to be hearing the extended versions of those discussions and chats that I had with people on the record. And to get the ball rolling, in today's episode, we're going to be enjoying our annual conversation with Josh Clark. He's a reviewer for Broadway Baby, which is an online reviewing organisation very much in evidence at the Edinburgh Fringe every year. And Josh is one of their more considered reviewers as far as I'm concerned. And it's always a pleasure to talk to him up in Edinburgh because he's someone who thinks about the shows he's seen, and it's that consideration that goes into his written reviews, which you can find online. But for Musical Talk, he and I always sit down every year and discuss some of the shows we've seen, sometimes together, sometimes apart, sometimes the same show but not at the same time. And so today is going to be the fruit of that conversation. We'll be talking about many shows, including, of course, Title of Show, which was up this year in an excellent production, more of which in a future episode. But you'll also be hearing about such shows as The Vaudevillains, The Ivor Novello Story, Promise and Promiscuity, a one-woman show purporting to be a new Jane Austen musical, Fringe favourite Adam and Eve and Steve, new writing, Trust Me, I'm a Drama Teacher, and How to Win Against History, which I'm absolutely certain will be going places. As I said, you will have heard the first 5 minutes of this conversation in last week's episode, but today we're going to hear the full conversation with Josh Clark. So let's not beat about the bush, let's get on with the meat of the sandwich and listen to that conversation I had with the always lovely, always intelligent Josh Clark. Musical Talk. Well, here we are again, Josh, for our annual conversation and roundup of some of the best and otherwise musicals of the Edinburgh Fringe. Now, of course, you're here in a professional capacity, so it's my privilege to talk to you because, you are an official observer of so many of the productions up here in Edinburgh.
Yes, once again, thank you very much for having me on, and nice to be maintaining that official capacity for the second year running. So I'm starting to feel like I know what I'm doing now.
Oh, your stuff is highly readable, and I would strongly recommend people go and look for your name, Josh Clark, on Broadway Baby?
Broadway Baby, that's right. In this official capacity, I do use Joshua. So,
do you?
Yeah, you probably have a bit more luck using that. But
I'm sorry, Mr. Clark.
That's fine.
However, you and I have been between us to a fair number of shows, many of which were musicals, some of which we've both seen, although not at the same time, and some of which I've seen and some of which you've seen, and the other one hasn't. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to sort of wander around our memories and see what comes to the top. But I was going to suggest we actually start with a show that I know we've both seen and we both thought was rather good. How to Win Against History.
Yes.
Would you care briefly to describe the show?
Yes, I can do, and I'll just start off by saying that actually this year it's been, for me, the pick of the Fringe entirely, musical theatre or just regular theatre, and it's one that I gave a rare 5-star review to.
Good lord.
But I could well have given it 6. I thought it was so good. So, a brief synopsis. It uses some historical material, although some material that you'd really have to dig deep to find, about a guy called Henry Paget, who lived around the turn of the century, late 1800s, I believe, who was the 5th Marquis or Earl of Anglesey. Marquis, wasn't it? Yeah, 5th Marquis of Anglesey. So a grandly titled fellow who came into the family wealth and promptly squandered all of it, I think within 5 or 6 years, living what they call in the show a rather fabulous life, full of sequins, if his costume's anything to go by, and was a cross-dresser, unusual for the time. So the
and
piece,
a heavy implication that he was a gay man.
Yeah, despite having his wife, although that was more of a...
Yes, well, Oscar Wilde managed that one as well.
Exactly,
So.
it's more of an arrangement of convenience for both parties there, wasn't it? And I suppose it's really a sort of biopic or bio-theatre piece, bioplay.
Bioact.
Bioact of this very interesting figure.
Yeah, now I agree with you. I think it was a remarkable piece, and in its way is really exploring what it is to transgress society's rules, particularly at periods that we would now look back on as fairly regressive, and being yourself. It's a message that's been up here a lot, actually, in a lot of shows I've seen this year. The two themes which are coming out are be yourself and carpe diem, get on with it. And this one certainly is in the be yourself mode.
Yeah.
So, as you quite rightly say, he lives the kind of life which anyone who knows anything about British history would be aware of from the beginning, i.e. he's an aristocrat, he goes to Eton and hates it, fags and all that kind of stuff, which is, for people who don't know the British argot, is to sort of, when junior members of the school sort of act as servants to the senior members of the school. Let's just clear that up. But he very quickly realises that's not for him, and his true self keeps coming through. And as you say, he inherits so young this remarkable wealth. But then it's about, yes, as you say, it's doing what he can to be who he is. I mean, there's a beautiful framing device in the piece, isn't there, that his sort of best friend is an actor that he hires to help him put on his theatricals, because that's what he's all about. Spending a lot of money and putting on shows, and nobody comes. But he takes them on tour. In fact, they say if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad must go to the mountain.
Yes, they eventually got to that, didn't they?
Yes.
There's a bit of a running gag about that one. And yeah, as you say, his friend is there, and he's almost, even though he goes along with all of the plans and ruses, he's almost the voice of reality, isn't he, in the corner, this figure that is there trying to ground the Marquis, even though he's not really successful in doing so.
Well, actually, yes, I suppose because the character, he's a kind of fruity actor, isn't he? He's not, I don't think he's not portrayed as being a good actor, if I may say. I mean, the actor playing him is excellent, but he's not playing a good actor. Yeah. And actually, at one level, you can see that almost as a bridging character, because he has the true business aspect of a businessman, which is what show business is. But also, he has the other foot in the camp of the artifice of show business, particularly at the fruitier end of it. So he knows how to straddle reality and make-believe in the way that the Marquis actually doesn't. And indeed, by the time he's doing avant-garde dance in Berlin a bit later on in the piece, you sort of get the impression that the Marquis is completely... He's so far being himself and so far transgressed from society, but he hasn't even got one foot left in the camp. Wearing a jacket is for him, a gentleman's tweed jacket is for him painful almost. So he's complete. He's like a hot air balloon, which is glorious, but has disappeared into the firmament so completely, never to be seen again. Or so it seems to me. Yeah,
he's really become a complete caricature of himself, hasn't he? And it's as though he's taken on certain characteristics or even affectations at a younger age, which have then just grown and grown, and he perhaps himself has come to find it difficult to separate his true self from almost the character that his life has become.
Yes, you're right, it is partly about image. I suppose the question is, how sincere is the Marquis in being who he is? Because there is towards the end of his life, by which time he's bankrupt and he's living in exile in Monte Carlo, there's a sort of an interview with, I think it's a sort of a Grub Street Daily Mail journalist of the worst kind. Well, that's at least how it's portrayed, rather amusingly, I must say, whereby he pretends to be, and I'm putting speech marks around this, normal. That's where he puts on his tweed jacket, and through fourth wall breaking a size to the audience, he makes it plain he hates it, but he's doing it in order to develop some kind of, well, is it to rehabilitate his own reputation, or is it to give himself some kind of armour to protect himself? I don't have an answer to that.
It could be either, really, couldn't it? But it's... With that little device of the newspaper, it's the image that he thinks he is expected to put across, isn't it, almost? And that he's perhaps fearful of what other people would say or think if he were to put himself out there in quite such a public way as being who he wants to be.
And who he wants to be, or who he actually is. I think that's the other question. I'm still pondering that one myself as well. There's... I think we need to put this in the context of the title, though. How to Win Against History. He has essentially been shunned by society. He's rich enough to ignore society, and he does, until the money runs out, and then society has its way with him, if you like. And when he dies young at 29, I think it is, the family burn almost every record of him. There's almost nothing left to history of him. He leaves no footprints in the sand except one extremely sneering obituary, which is quoted in full. And the actor playing him is such a sort of gentle soul, or certainly playing him as a gentle soul, and so he reads out the obituary, which really is a horrible one about him. And he says, well, there is that, that is my epitaph. But then but through the play, you get to see that he's living life the way we assume he wants to live life. And then as he dies, isn't it? He has this kind of death on his own terms. And he says, this is how to win against history. I sort of won against history, because at least he died the man he was, rather than the man he was being required to be. Did that work for you?
It sort of did, because I think it is there just at the end that we do see this fragility in his character, and almost this first element of self-doubt about who he is, because just as he's saying, I almost won, there's this really strong repetition of, I was a cross-dresser, I am a cross-dresser, and it's that element that really came to the fore right at the end, wasn't it? Much apart from all of anything else that he did. And so perhaps there's something about, well, as you say, it's almost his sexuality is the key thing there, rather aside from how he presents that.
Yes, because he even within the gay world, he takes a fairly extreme position for the Edwardian era, an excessively strange one, although, of course, he is in that period of the avant-garde, which actually does allow a little bit more leeway than we remember.
Right.
There's also the vorticists in art and all this kind of stuff as well, people deliberately breaking convention, so there's no reason why, as an artist, which is how he portrays himself, you wouldn't also do that in your life. But these are highfalutin ideas.
Yeah, and I suppose equally, that ending could just as well be him grasping to convince himself that actually his life has had some meaning at all. And I was a cross-dresser. That is an achievement in this time. Remember this.
Well, you're right. I mean, so I suppose I've got to ask you the question: is this a tragedy?
Oh, is it a tragedy? Well, I suppose in the classical sense, we'd be looking for some sort of heroic figure with a tragic flaw, wouldn't we? I'm not overly sure there's too many heroic elements. Not so much. It's tragic in the sense that I think you do get a strong feeling of affection and warmth for the figure and how he's presented.
He's very empathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so by the end, I think there is a genuine pathos for his
that
demise.
Might be a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And also, as you quite rightly pointed out, it is when he dies that he shows his strength of character. Because in a way, he's actually a little bit... Well, he sings a song called Electric Butterfly or something, doesn't he? Which is as much a reference to who he is and what he's doing and how he's being as anything else. So he's quite this ephemeral character. And then suddenly the steel comes out at the end, I think. So I think, actually, I don't think it's a tragedy. I think... And also, of course, we're invited to look at it with 21st century eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, the villain, the big bad in the piece is Edwardian society. We now look back on the family and think, how dare you destroy all records of this man who was the actual Marquis.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a musical.
It is a musical, and I think the music's superb, really.
Well, I was going to say yes. Now, do you think it being a musical is something that actually enhanced the piece?
Yeah.
I can tell yes, but, but why?
Well, I think for this sort of character, it just works completely, and it's one of those shows where you could almost genuinely accept that this man lived his life through song.
Yeah, well, yes.
And so, even though it's very over the top, and a lot of the music has been written with a very knowing nod to certain styles of commercial musical theatre, it does work.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I think, and it moves through...
It might be a stew, but it's a very tasty one.
Absolutely. And it even moves through different styles of music. There's lots of very upbeat ones, but there are also, I suppose, to bring us up to the end point, there are ones of more reflection and thoughtfulness, almost.
Oh, yes, it meets... There are a number of styles, but it also meets a number of emotional situations. But the thing I think, and neither of us really mentioned this, is that it is also undoubtedly an out-and-out comedy with tragic or pathetic elements in it, and in some cases pathetic elements. But it's a comedy. It's a three-hander essentially. There's the actor playing the Marquis. There's the actor playing the actor.
Yep.
And then, and by no means third, there is a very tall gentleman who's resplendent, who's dressed as a kind of footman, who plays the piano and is therefore the musical accompaniment. But also performs in roles. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lovely moment, by the way, when we get a sort of sub-Dickensian moment where we have two ghosts visiting a young Marquis, telling him he's really got to go off and do something and be the man he is, actually. It's and the two of them together make a very, if I may say, very comedic set of phantoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Between the three of them, they slip in and out of harmonies instantaneously,
Oh, yes.
and they're absolutely spot on. It's a very tightly polished piece, isn't it, in every sense, actually.
It is, and yet, I recognise the gentleman. I don't know his name, I regret, but the gentleman who's playing the piano, I recognise from a number of shows over the last few years. Certainly last year, and he may even be doing it this year because it's up here, or at least one of the variants of it is, there is, and you're part of my language, there's something called shit-faced song tunes and shit-faced Shakespeare, and this year they're doing shit-faced Pirates of Penzance.
Good golly.
Yes, quite. Which I haven't seen, I must say. I saw last year's shit-faced song tunes, and the idea, it's an improvised piece actually, where 3 or 4 actors go off performing songs, and one of them is supposed to have got drunk beforehand and therefore can't hold the note and goes around being a lively drunk during the show. But it's actually an improvised piece. I don't want to break it here. No one is drunk. But he is he was the musical accompanist, musical director of that show. And I've also seen him in improvised musicals a few years ago before that. He's a very funny man, so I think of him almost as a comic first. He's obviously a musical comic. But because I associate him with improvised music, I'm wondering what the creative process was for the score of this. Whether it's one of those... what I don't know is whether he was the composer.
Well, I can enlighten you on this one, actually.
Thank you, sir.
He was not. Although I assumed at the time, similar to you, that actually he might have been.
Yes.
But in fact, I believe that the actor that was playing the Marquis, a guy called Cyril Davis,
Yes.
is himself a very accomplished pianist, and we get a little glimpse of that at the end.
We do, that's right. He sits down for one last song.
Yes, now I believe that he wrote the book and the music,
Oh, did he now?
and performs as Henry Paget. I did a little bit of research before doing this review, and he grew up himself on Anglesey and went into...
Which is the Marquis state, or Marquis,
exactly.
I don't know what the term is, actually.
No, island.
Well, no.
Domain.
I'm
Empire.
talking about the title.
Oh, I see.
He is the Marquis of, and therefore it's an earldom for an earl.
Oh,
Is it a
yes.
marquisate? It's not a marquisdom, is it? Anyway,
I don't know.
That's something I'll look up later.
Yeah. Well, he knew about Henry Paget from an early age and was fascinated by him. And so this show has grown out of that almost local knowledge of where Davis grew up. And I may be wrong, but as far as I know, he wrote the book and the music as well.
Well, he's a very, very talented man, and as you say, he's also able to get that character across. You know, he's picked up invisible traces to create a character that feels plausible and real.
I've got to say that actually, it's that much more creditable to his performance. I think that he, having written the thing, is able to play the main parts so well.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic link, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you may think that, okay, if you've written the show, perhaps someone else would be better to play it, but I think in this case it's absolutely spot on for that part.
Well, it's whether you can judge what you've written or can't judge what you've written, but I think he can. So yeah, I didn't know that, and I'm delighted to hear it, because actually there were no flaws in the performances at all.
No.
I think the chap playing the actor is fantastic as well, because a lot of the comedy rests on him, actually. I mean, it is that traditional theatre thing, actually, where you have one character who does not change who they are, the Marquis, around which other actors then play a series of characters. You have to have this kind of lodestone character, if you like. The actor, being an actor, I mean, you know, the conceit is in your face, is going to be playing all these other characters, as is the footman accompanist. I mean, I'm just going to mention a couple of points. I love this, when we're in performance on national tours, there's a fantastic song called How Do You Think It Went? And it's a trio. They're on the road, they're going to different places, and there's just one thing about it which I love. They each of them, all three of them, sing one after the other, how do you think it went? But they all put different emphasis on the sentence. So one says, how do you think it went? And how do you think it went? And how do you think it went? And I thought, actually, do you know, that's a jolly clever conceit for a song and a lyric. And just brings it just up above the ordinary into something rather special.
Well, they said very early on in the piece that we don't mean to challenge you. And I think you can be as challenged or as unchallenged in this piece as you really want to be. A lot of the songs are so fast-paced, aren't they? I couldn't believe the articulation of the songs.
Yes, when I say this, I don't mean it's really beautiful diction.
Yeah, really. Thank you. But if you really listen to the lyrics, they're so cleverly written, and there's so many references and little side swipes at various things that it's not something that's just been thrown together at all. It's a very tightly put together thing.
And I'm just going to make one final comment, at least from my point of view. It's not connected with that per se, but it's the fact that actually we're back to the Footman musical director again. He's a very, very tall man, very distinctive looking man, and he stands all the way through, which allows him better access as an actor. You know, it gives him an opportunity to then sort of detach himself from his keyboard, but it does mean you have to have a high keyboard and a man standing playing for an hour, which is actually very impressive. It's quite a feat. Physically, it looks quite exhausting for the three of them.
Without any sheet music at all, by the way.
I noticed that, so he's learnt it.
Yeah.
Which presumably is where his improv skills come in, because he may be able to improvise on this. I don't know this, but he may be improvising on a theme in order to act as incidental and developmental music. So I think on the whole, we're very thumbs up on this, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. I did actually try to go back and buy tickets to see it for a second time, but it was sold out until I was going home, so... more's the pity, but at least they're getting sellout audiences, which is well deserved.
And lots of stars, not least from you.
Not least from me, so 5 stars from me.
And from me, as it happens.
Yeah, the only musical to get that from me this year.
Jolly good. Which means it can only be downhill from now on. But that's not absolutely true. Let's talk about another show that we've both seen. Very different in style. This is title of show, or to spell it correctly, open square bracket title of show, close square bracket. It's an established piece. It's been running around now for a good few years, possibly a decade or so, actually. And it is often described as a meta-musical, with good reason. Once again, before we get into the nuts and bolts, do you want to have a crack at... good luck on this, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So a meta-musical, and by which you mean it's a musical about the process of writing a musical.
I do.
And it's a very strange piece. It's almost like the conceit of watching television and seeing yourself watching television, and on that same television watch yourself watching television ad infinitum, because the writers of the piece actually did have a musical theatre competition in mind. For 3 weeks from the date they started, they had to submit a copy of a finished musical book and music, and that is the story of the piece. And as far as you can tell, whatever the writers of the show said went into the play, and it has remained in there. And so it treads the balance between having that purposeful roughness, but also songs which would have made it into a finished musical piece. So it's one for, I think, people that are themselves at least familiar with the process of what a musical theatre piece is, if not fully immersed in that world.
If you just came to it cold, it would be a very difficult first step for anyone to fall in love with musical theatre with. However, if you're already in, yes, absolutely.
You love it.
The water's warm, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of in-jokes for the musical theatre community, really.
Well, some of them, very, very obscure. I mean, it's a song where they just reference Broadway flops.
Yes.
And some of those flops are probably now best remembered only because they're featuring the lyrics of this show, which is a considerably more successful show. And that's an odd meta thing as well in its own right. I've got a question for you then, if you don't mind me saying. I mean, I thought the production was spotless. I thought it was very, very good, very crisp, very clear. The story came across, and it could be very difficult to lose yourself in this if it wasn't a very good production. But is it a verbatim theatre piece? And you know what I mean by verbatim theatre? Yeah,
I mean, well, in its purest sense, verbatim would be using authentic words from people and then putting it into the play. So,
I think, by the way, you've hit on the button. The word is authentic.
Authentic.
So I want to know. I want your take on this. Because I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't know. I would imagine not. Although with occasional lines, probably that were said during the process, and they thought, okay, yeah, we'll have that. I think it would be impossible to have this show fully verbatim. You'd have too much material, and
3 weeks worth.
3 weeks worth.
Is it 3 weeks or 3 months?
Yeah, 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and it wouldn't keep an audience's attention. So perhaps selective verbatim.
Which I think, but the question then is, verbatim theatre and verbatim musicals do that too, of course. I mean, there's no such thing as true verbatim theatre, because, as you say, people stop to make a cup of tea and have a sandwich and go to the lavatory and things like that.
Although that was in the show.
Yes, that is true. But also, it hints that actually some of this has been carefully assembled, because Jeff, who's the composer, says to Hunter, the lyricist, "I wish you'd stop giving yourself all the best lines." So you get a very strong sense that there's been an assemblage and a selection. But it borrows very heavily from verbatim. But what I genuinely don't know is how verbatim it actually is. Because it could actually possibly be a truly created piece, by which I mean they have written it to feel like a meta theatre and a verbatim theatre piece. I simply don't know. It also has another issue, which is it's a 2-act piece. It's a long version we get here in Edinburgh. Act 1 is what they send to the festival.
Yeah.
Which means that Act 2 is a later edition. And often, when you expand a show, Act 2 is traditionally slightly less good than Act 1. The irony in this is, I think that Act 1 is more interesting as a narrative, but Act 2 is more interested in this emotional journey, because actually you start to see the cracks in the working relationship with the composers, because one of them is rather more ambitious, but also less, it sounds dreadful, seemingly has less integrity. He's prepared to take on board other people's comments to just get it into a Broadway theatre, where the other one is saying, no, let's be true to ourselves. Hunter being the one who seems to be the slightly more ambitious one, and Jeff being the one who's saying, let's be true. So there's all these little... It gets pulled in lots of little directions, I think. What do you think? I'm sorry, I've rambled on.
Yeah, no, I agree, and you're right about the interest in the narrative towards the end, because... You know, at the beginning, you've got the song about two nobodies in New York, and that is Hunter and Jeff, who just live very run-of-the-mill lives in, you know, fairly uninteresting jobs. And the piece does begin with them fully together, doesn't it? Loving what they're doing, the excitement of creating this show just for the excitement of doing what they love. And then, as you say, moving into the second act, they start to pull apart, because Hunter... He's lost so much more in just the glamour and the idea of having a musical on Broadway, and it's his dream, and it's the sort of follow your heart, do whatever it takes to get there, which isn't a terrible thing. At all, no. It just causes the tension when Jeff is still all about the art and the, you know, actually, the word you used was good, integrity to the form, really.
We're both smiling as we say this, aren't we?
Yes, indeed. So, no, I do agree with you.
Just to underline that briefly, there's the sort of the pinnacle moment of that is what's the song in the middle of Act 2, which is called Awkward Photo Shoot, when the two of them and the two women, the two actresses who've been working with them to help develop the piece, so therefore, you know, they're getting success, they're having a photo shoot, but at that point, none of them are talking to each other, so there's lots of sort of bitchy asides during the course of this rather lovely song, as they do these Vogue poses, as it were, you know.
That's right. It's just a very visual way, isn't it, of showing that relationship, but it works very well. And all the songs all the way through it are lots of fun, and as you say, there's plenty of references, which again is a bit of an in-joke sort of thing, so I made a note of a few of them. You've got Into the Woods.
Oh, the King's Festival?
Yes. Yeah. Which, a very brief little thing that you'd have to know the show very well to pick up on, but it's full of those moments where if you do know this world, you'll constantly be patting yourself on the back thinking, oh yes, I get that.
I'm going to put that in my big spotted book of musical theatre.
Yeah, that's right. So,
could that be exclusive? I mean, I think you've already answered that. Yeah.
I think so.
It's for an immersed audience, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, it did have this brief run sort of on Broadway, didn't it? But not for very long, and perhaps that's part of the reason. Once you've expunged all of your audience, there's perhaps not too much room for expansion.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It was written for a festival, a theatre festival, a musical festival, and I only ever get to see it at musical festivals. This is the second time I've seen it, both times in Edinburgh. Right. Both times I've loved it, but I suspect you're exactly right. Even if you put it in a small theatre in the West End, Bless, the Arts or something like that, would it succeed? I don't know. Do you know the Sondheim piece, Merrily We Roll Along?
Know of it, I haven't seen it.
Can I just say that Merrily We Roll Along starts with the breakup of a working relationship, you know, three friends who have been creative. It starts with them in middle age, the final breakup of that friendship, or one of the last bits of that friendship, and then it goes backwards to their idealistic let's put on a show start. In some senses, title of show is Merrily We Roll Along in chronological order. It's doing it the right way round. I always wonder if there's any, whether that was somebody's idea. Let's do this the right way around. How would we do it? Or let's write title of show.
Possibly. I mean, you've sort of spoken about the origins of the piece, and that it generally was a 3-week gap that the writers had to do a show. So that was the main intention. Whether or not they realised those sort of parallels with other shows later on, I don't know.
Yes, it's easy to retcon, isn't it? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm in the business of that in some sense. Tell me, did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, I did very much enjoy it. I saw it very early on in the run, so there were things that could be worked on, but I'm sure they have been. They've been up here for a few weeks now, and again, it's one that I would happily go back and see again. There was nothing unlikable about it, just maybe slightly less polished than it probably is already now.
Well, I saw it sometime later, and it was polished.
Yeah.
I actually think there was nothing I could do to buff it any further.
Yeah.
You particularly liked what the musical director was doing, because it's a one-man band in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't mean a one-man band. I mean one man on a keyboard. He didn't turn up with cymbals on his knees.
Yes, no, I thought he was very good. A guy called Harry Hayden Brown, who takes on the persona of Larry, so not Harry, but Larry. And similarly to How to Win Against History in some senses, he's more than just the man at the piano. He is referenced by the cast a few times, just in another meta layer. Yes. It's like, oh, look, we can see the man playing the music on stage. Oh, why is there a pianist in your living room? And he gets involved, has a few lines. Even on the night I saw it, piece of the stage was about to fall over, and he leapt up and caught it. And,
did he?
And there's a bit of ad-libbing about, oh, well done, Larry. Oh, good job.
That didn't happen the time I saw it.
Oh, well, I'm glad about that. Otherwise, I would have felt less privileged to see it, I think. But he became a firm fan's favourite very early on. I don't know about your performance, but he got the biggest cheer at the end.
He was certainly much appreciated.
Yeah.
Well, he does work all the way through.
He does, and
he just does it in a sitting position.
And his performances at the piano are superb. Actually,
no doubt about that.
It's a perfect Fringe piece in the sense that it's very low on resources that you need.
4 chairs
and 5 bodies, a piano, but it has a really great impact, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's strange. I love it. I think it's very good. I'm not sure, however. This sounds dreadful. When I say I wonder what worth it has worth in itself as an immaculately crafted piece, and this is a very, very good production. But is it a dinner or is it a snack? And I have a feeling it's a lovely snack.
Yes, it's a bit of an after-dinner mint, perhaps. And it's on at 9:20 or something like that, isn't it?
So after 8, in fact.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I don't know. It's a thoroughly enjoyable piece that maybe even less than How to Win Against History seeks to challenge you.
Yes.
Anyway, it's pure entertainment, isn't it? It's
a narrative with less meaning.
Yeah.
But plenty of pleasurable incident on the way.
Yeah. I mean, you do have the 4 characters that do have a certain amount of depth and development to them, and however overblown they are in performance, you can see the humanity, and anyone in the audience that, again, is from that world will probably identify with one of those characters and sort of see a little bit of themselves in that, and therefore identify with their journey, however well crafted that is. So I'm struggling to say anything new other than it will have resonance with someone that knows what it's about.
I think your conclusion is absolutely on the button there. I'm just going to mention one thing that my least satisfactory part of it. It's actually in the book, nothing to do with the performances at all.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that in narrative terms, the story we are being told is the story of Jeff and Hunter. It is their story to put on their show. And it's being done in a pseudo-verbatim way. And they are the camera as well as the voice. There is a scene in the second act, I think, where we just have the women, which is a good... And I know why it's there structurally, and the song is fine, and the sentiment is fine, as they sort of reveal they're slightly jealous of each other whilst sort of liking each other. But in the narrative set, in the conceit that has been set up, that cannot be there. Do you see what I'm saying?
In what way?
Well, Jeff and Hunter have gone off to talk to the judges at the festival.
Yeah.
So there is no camera to see them,
I see.
and there is no voice to record them. So it's an off scene. It's a scene which has been included for dramaturgical reasons.
Yeah, it did feel a bit like, okay, we've got the 2 female characters, they ought to have a song together.
Yeah, and I understand all that.
Yeah. I know, a very good song, performed very well, but yeah, okay.
And it's such a niggle, that's it's not a problem in any way. It's just it broke the conceit slightly for me, which is why I've been thinking about how verbatim and how authentic this actually is.
Sure, and I've got to say, when I wrote my review of it, I was consciously very careful of reviewing the performance rather than the show itself, and speaking to the musical director Harry back and forth a little bit after the review, he has commented that much of what has been written about it has praised the performance, praised the music, criticised the book, which is not, well, it's not at all their fault.
No.
But in terms of the show as a whole, leaving aside the performance, it is maybe a slight shortcoming, isn't it?
I think it's a great show. I think it's a great production. I just wouldn't want all shows to be like this. I wouldn't even want lots of shows to be like this. It's a lovely one-off.
Yeah.
Musical talk. So those are two shows that we've seen this year, not at the same time. There's one other show which we've both seen, but the gap between our seeing it is 1 year. Because I saw it last year, that's the Ivor Novello story, and you saw it up here this year. In a different venue, I think. Now,
yes.
Listeners may remember that I was very taken with it, but then again, Ivor Novello is my kind of thing.
Okay.
And I think it's just a beautiful, well, certainly last year it was a beautiful professional production, but I'm very interested to, I'm going to ask you, I should say this, but you're a bright young thing. You're a man of the world, but you're younger than I am by a generation, I'm very sad to say. How was it for you?
Well, as you allude to, I did have to take a very long journey to get there. It's an unusual Fringe venue, even though it is an official Fringe venue. It's called the Brunton Theatre in Musselburgh, so half an hour, 40 minutes outside of the main town, if you like. But it's well worth going to.
It's also nice to see other parts of Edinburgh because you've got so much to offer as a city. It's a fantastic city.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
I occasionally venture off into slightly more provincial and suburban parts of the city, but I've never failed to enjoy it.
And it was unusual as well in the sense that I was sent along to review the show, even though it was just a one-off this year. I don't know if it had if it had a longer run last year.
Yes. I mean, it was only a week or so, I think, last year. But there was repeated performances last year.
Okay, so I'll be reviewing it, but no one will be seeing it.
Well, unless it comes back next year.
Yes, exactly. I believe they're on a sort of sporadic tour around Scotland at the moment, so there will be opportunity. But I was very pleased to go there in the end. It's a really nice piece. It's, to be honest, it's more of a tribute to Ivor Novello and his life, and a bit of an education for people that don't know about him, and a real tribute and nostalgia trip for the older generation that remembered him at the time, I guess.
It's a very delightful wallow in a warm bath if you know the material.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some familiar songs in there, but I think the writer John Kearney has also really plumbed the full back catalogue of Novello's works.
And it's an extensive back catalogue, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, he was a prolific writer.
A prolific writer, and there's over 20 songs, I think, in this fairly short piece, to be honest. It's only about an hour and a quarter long, all told, but they fit a lot in, journeying right from some of his earliest work up to the later ones. And the conceit is quite simple. You've got a singer, James Dinsmore, who's playing Novello on this occasion, who almost doubles as something of a third-person narrator. Novello did this, he lived like this, but then also merging into playing the composer himself and singing some of the songs and pulling knowing faces at the audience at certain moments to underscore how Novello was feeling at the time. And then he's complemented by a soprano and a mezzo with, again, an excellent pianist who also gets involved a little bit. So that's perhaps a theme of shows this year. But again, there's very minimal staging. A few of the songs have a bit of dramatic interplay between the characters, but some of them are just presented as songs in their own right, which is quite nice.
So it's more than a concert, though, isn't it? There is a narrative drive to it. But as you say, a light telling of his story.
It's a dramatised autobiography.
Yes, I think that's fair, isn't it? Yes.
In a potted sense.
Did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy it, and I hold my hands up here and say that my knowledge of Ivor Novello is certainly not as good as yours, but probably not as good as most people in the audience last night.
Yes.
I would imagine. But
were you 40 years younger than almost everyone else?
Almost everyone except the person I was sitting next to, but we were very much an island in a sea of Novello fans from the time, let's put it that way.
I mean, I'm going to be honest, let's just contextualise this. Ivor Novello and his fandom still exists, very clearly still exists, but it is now an ageing fandom because Ivor Novello, for whatever reason, there's very few Ivor Novello shows, there's no revivals, they very rarely get revived, it's almost nothing. So he's sort of receding into history, and so the people who remember him so fondly are the people who were there right up until the end of the 50s. I mean, he died in the early 50s, but his shows were still being revived, but they die out in the 60s.
Why do you think that is? Because
It's a very good question.
Gilbert and Sullivan, for example, is still thriving, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
I saw the Mikado here.
Right, okay, and comic musical pieces of a slightly different style, keep being given new life. Why is it that you don't see Novello pieces? What do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues at play here. first of all, and it ties in with this there was a kind of iconography around Ivor Novello. And when he died, it sort of stopped the train, which ironically is the name of a musical up here as well. But it sort of stopped the train in the sense that it's very difficult to imagine anyone else performing, because he used to appear, although he didn't sing so much. And there's a few recordings of him singing, but he often plays the act or sort of narrates parts, because he has a very odd sort of Welsh-Italian voice. It's very strange. But I know when he died, they replaced him with Jack Buchanan, who was a big British star of the 50s. But they were expensive shows because they're lush, they're operetta. They aren't actually that funny. Unlike Coward, who does and could do the lyrics as well. All of Novella's lyrics are written by other people. There are a few funny songs, but for the most part, it's the romantic end of the market. I always think that if you take Coward for the comedy, you take Novello for the romance, and if you put the two of them together, you've got the almost perfect British composer.
Okay.
Who I would call Vivian Ellis, but there we are. That's a discussion for another day. So I think he was already backward looking in the 1950s when he died. So I think he just fell out of favour so thoroughly in the 50s, and the estate didn't allow many revivals.
Right.
So he's been allowed to wither on the vine. He's been pickled in aspic. Funnily enough, completely unrelated, like Tintin, the Hergé estate has more or less said, right, no new Tintin. You know, there's been requests to write new stuff, but it's all been turned down. And the problem is, you then start receding into history, and the new generation don't pick it up because you have to sort of inherit it. Why Gilbert and Sullivan do is actually, I think they're actually more rounded, actually, because you've got the comedy, some beautiful songs, beautiful tunes. The narratives still hold up. They're beautiful, intricate pieces. Whereas Novella stuff is a bit more flighty and lush and romantic, and actually that sits slightly uncomfortably, I think, in the modern era of the 60s onwards. That's my view. So I think it's the estate and tastes. But
I mean, that said, I don't know how it was in your performance last year, but the theatre was absolutely packed for it.
It was indeed, yeah. And there were several things, because before we started recording, I asked you this question, and it's worth asking again on the record. The slightly older men and ladies there, who I would say, I'm guessing from my experience, were in their 70s or older, probably. Certainly when Keep the Home Fires Burning, which is the big Novello song, came on, they all joined in. They weren't invited to join in, they just all joined in. And it was quite strange, because I like you, I was sitting there as an island of, even in my incredible middle age, as an island of youth, shall we say, comparatively. And it was truly atmosphere building. It was evocative and strange, but what that immediately said was, look how powerful this song is for that generation. Bearing in mind it's a First World War song. It was used again in the Second World War, of course. That song has an amazing power, and that is the secret to Novello. And I think we don't get it, but for the people who do, there's no one better. Did they sing?
They did sing, and it was very unusual to suddenly hear everyone around me taking on this song. There was a slight difference. They were semi-invited to do so.
Oh, were they?
There was just a sort of gesture, half invitation. If you want to sing, that would be okay. That sort of
Fill
thing.
your boots.
That's right. And it absolutely went for it, and it was lovely. Just filled the whole room, and for someone like me who hasn't lived through, so not the first, but not the second either. Whereas a lot of the audience would have lived partly through the Second World War. It was really interesting, almost as an outsider, to what was a community or a subsection of society just refinding an aspect of what they'd all lived through together, and it was a really sort of touching moment. Really.
Particularly when we bear in mind we're in 2016. The war is a long time ago. It's an odd moment, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the reasons I love the show so much. But actually, it presents something which I haven't had in any other show in Edinburgh ever. That, as you say, that a community refining itself. It's such a beautiful phrase. Well done. I like that. That's very right. Just from your own experience, then, and from what you saw in the show, were there any other songs that seemed particular favourites? Because I think there's going to be. I'm going to identify two in a minute. Right? I imagine were particularly well received, but I just wondered if you spotted them.
Well, there was one that went down an absolute storm, which is a little bit different to the others. It was a completely overtly comic song.
I know which one this is going to be, I think.
Okay, well, it was And Her Mother Came Too.
It is, with lyrics by Christopher Hassels.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was that one of the ones you were going to say?
That is absolutely one of the ones, and it's one of the other songs that still survives.
Right.
Just briefly, Jim Dale, one of the many Barnums. Let's just take us back to title of show, where they get the two composers get excited that Jim Dale and Michael Crawford are in a show together, or some kind of interview, because they are the two Barnums.
Yep.
Jim Dale was doing a one-man show in London last year, in 2015, and a friend of mine went to see it, and it turns out that Jim Dale's career started by singing And Her Mother Came Too, and it was still getting laughs. So it was still being performed on the West End in 2016.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's your link. So.
Yeah. No, that was great, because it was a bit more bouncy and jocular than some of the more flowing romantic songs.
It does stick out from the canon, actually. As the funny one.
Absolutely. And well, now sort of knowing that Novello wasn't perhaps the writer of the lyrics,
yes.
It's all about the wordplay in there, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And her mother, without ruining it, I think it's been around long enough to say this now. It's about a courting couple being dogged by the potential mother-in-law.
That's right.
And her mother came too is the joke, and so I have her sit on my knee. And her mother does too. And we lunch at Maxime's, and her mother came too. How large are snack scenes when her mother comes too? And then at the very end, you get this marvellous bit where they're on the golf course and she faints, and they suddenly say, "Oh, Jack dear, we are free." And then her mother came too, as in regain consciousness. I think that's a beautiful reusage.
Yeah, just a little twist, but it works absolutely perfectly, doesn't it?
And any other songs that really?
Well, It's Bound to Be Right on the Night.
That was sung by Cicely Courtnidge originally.
Okay, this is excellent knowledge.
Recorded. As I say, this is my bag of nose.
Yeah.
I all know this stuff.
Fly Home Little Heart as well. Went down very well.
Now that's interesting, because that's a slightly lesser known number. The one I'm sort of thinking of is the one they finish on, actually. We'll Gather Lilacs. Because, believe it or not, that was covered by Simon May, who's the theme writer of the EastEnders theme tune, with his orchestra in the 1980s. Right. And you heard it. It's a very lush, romantic number. We'll gather lilacs in the spring again, wander down an English lane again, all this kind of stuff. For that to chart in the 80s,
yes,
that's Ivor Novello's sort of last gasp, almost. I just wondered if that was a song that, they chose to finish on it, didn't they? So.
Yeah, it didn't particularly stand out against the other ones last night, but
you enjoyed it, and I'm delighted.
Yeah, no, I did enjoy it. Nice to see something actually completely different to the other things that are on at the Fringe.
It's overtly classy, isn't it, as a piece?
Yeah.
They're dressed to the nines, ball gowns, and dinner suits.
That's right. Well, it's put on by the group called Classical Musicians Scotland, and the performers themselves have had amazing careers in opera and musical theatre and just pure voice work. So it's not a cheap reworking of the songs. It's people that could well have performed the music at the time of Novello, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely, and in the style of, in a way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you enjoyed that. And I look forward to reading your review on that one, by the way, because I'm interested to see what you have to say from your vantage point. While you were at that last night, I went to see a show which is remarkable. It's called The Vaudevillains. It's odd because, just briefly in terms of conceit, it's set in a seedy variety theatre come music hall in a time that could be any time from about... It could be anything from about 1880 to about 1930. And it's being performed in one of the Spiegel tents, which are these large big tops, which are beautiful big tops. They have wooden structures and they're a proper performing stage. To me, they feel like they were kind of travelling circus or theatre in the Wild West, but they have a solidity to them. But the atmosphere is exactly right for this kind of slightly seedy show. And the concept is, we come in and we're treated to the beginning of the show. Welcome to the Empire is a song, and then you have your Master of Ceremonies, ringmaster if you like, and then it's a kind of freak show. There's a knife thrower, there's Siamese triplets who strip, they're striplets. You see where we're going with this. Yeah. There's a very manic ventriloquist and dummy, in the old style, solid head kind of ventriloquist dummy, the one with the jaw that goes up and down and got the gear type, and people like that. So the opening number is Welcome to the Empire, and they all have a song in this opening number explaining what their act is and what their particular twist is. And then the plot starts. The owner of the Empire comes in drunk and says, "You'll never get away with this," and is dragged round the back and is found dead immediately.
Yeah.
And so no one knows who did it, but they all realise it must be one of them. and then they each sing a song which is their backstory song. So each song is about 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
And tells a complete story. And in each case, each story is beautifully different from the previous one. There's a mime, so that you get a sequence. It's hard to describe. A sequence song in mime with intertitles projected on the back screen from when he's speaking. Very funny, by the way, all the way through this. The ventriloquist is my favourite character. He's called Albert Frog, and what was he? Was he called Mr. Chippy or something like that? He's rude vent. But he turns out that he's got a dual personality, and he's locked up in an asylum after murdering a school child when he was at school. Someone who bullied him. And he's eventually released back into society when he gets his... Well, he gets back into society when he gets his vent, because his psychiatrist, which I suppose makes it 1920s, thinks that the best way of resolving his dual personality is by giving him another person he can project that into.
Okay.
So that becomes the psychotic part of his personality. So that's a beautiful story. I say beautiful. These are beautifully performed. Very, very professional show. Absolutely professional show. I hope it goes on tour. So you get each of these backstories for each of the people who did it, and they've all got a secret, which means they could all be the murderer. And then it comes to the end, and then they work out who the murderer actually is. I'm not going to say. So you get the song at the end, which is "Oh, you did it," and then you get the denouement and how it resolves, and then you get a reprise of the opening number. This is the Empire. So actually, structurally, really simple. This is who we are and what we do. This is who we were. This is how we got to what we do. Resolution of the dramatic narrative that's pushing us forward is who did the murder. Thank you very much. So that sounds really simplistic, but actually, oddly, a little bit like the Ivan Novello story. The reason it succeeds, apart from being an absolutely 18-carat gold professional piece, really well written, really wittily written with wonderful lyrics, is that it creates an atmosphere. And I don't just mean a physical atmosphere, in the sense that tent helps and some really good lighting, remarkable lighting actually. I don't often comment on the lighting, but the lighting was remarkable. Just enough smoke to give it that kind of sort of edge, but the performance and the performers managed to combine to create this sense of not quite a freak show, but a seedy, almost freak show. You really feel that you're there. They conjure it up tremendously. It is an evocation. It is a creation of an atmosphere in which this rather lovely little sort of bijou show takes place. And I am just going to go back to the introductory song by the ventriloquist and his dummy, because it's so witty. It's called "I Was Hollow Before You," which of course the dummy was, and of course the chap with the psychosis also was to a degree.
Right.
He becomes a much more satisfactory member of society through getting his dummy. So it has that meaning. And the dummy, the dummy is a duet, if you like, and the dummy sings this song about, you gave me a hand. Well, of course you do. You gave me a voice. And there's similar lyrics all the way through. It's simple stuff, but but it doesn't overplay it. It doesn't mug its lines. It just sings this beautiful, witty song, which is genuinely funny. It's also a genuine character piece, and it's good observational stuff, all in one. It was a very sophisticated piece. And if I was asked what kind of tone it had, I would go for Grand Guignol. That's exactly what it was. It's this could be anywhere in Europe in the first 30 years of the 20th century. Very strange. It's a wonderful, strange, macabre. I almost can't describe it, but by just describing its elements, I hope I've given something of it. But it was a wonderful show, and a real pick-me-up at the end of the day as well. I have to say, it was pouring with rain yesterday, wasn't it? It was an absolutely miserable day. We've had a lovely time in Edinburgh, actually, but yesterday was Noah was building his ark, let's just say. And then I finished the day with the Vaudevillains, and immediately 5-star show, I'd say.
Excellent. Well, it was one that was on my list to get to. Unfortunately, having to go to Musselburgh for the other one, it ran out of time. But
yes, the travelling ruined that for you.
Yeah, it did a little bit. But I've heard only good things about that as well.
I'm hoping that will go somewhere. It feels like it ought to as well. It's a beautifully crafted piece, just lovely, with an awful lot of murder.
Excellent.
Because there's a lot of murder in the backstories.
Okay, good. Well, there was another show that I saw this year that I believe you saw last year. So another one we saw a year apart. We can't let a year go by, I feel, without discussing something Jane Austen based.
I know what you're going to say now, I think. Yes.
So it may well be that you've discussed it before Musical Talk,
I haven't actually.
Okay.
So this is a welcome opportunity.
We'll have a brief word, therefore, for Promise and Promiscuity.
Which is a cracking title, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's not unlike, obviously, Sense and Sensibility, but with a hint to the rather more crude nature of some of the lyrics and themes in there. But a piece of new writing, a few years old now though, isn't it? By Penny Ashton and performed by her. All the characters.
It's a one-woman show.
It is a one-woman show. But it does borrow heavily from Austen herself, and there are, as the performer revealed to us at the end, 33 separate extracts or short passages from all of Austen's works in there, which Penny Ashton has stitched into some new type of narrative, similar-ish to a lot of Austen's own characters, at least in their sort of...
She borrows the tropes, doesn't
exactly,
she?
it's the tropes. And so for Austen fans, it's something which feels familiar, even though it's got a heavy dose of satire and tongue-in-cheek about it.
Well, it's a spoof, but it's also a fugue in that sense, isn't it? As you say, it takes the tropes and takes some of the real quotations and weaves this tapestry, which then she overlays her own comic sensibilities. I think because it is, it's actually a comedy.
Yes.
As Austen musicals aren't always.
Yes. Yeah, you're right, actually. And as a performer, she is excellent at engaging with the audience and knows exactly how to extract the humour from any given line or moment in a song. And so the real success actually is in the performance of the piece, isn't it?
It is actually, yes, because you can tell she's a cabaret actress rather than, I don't mean this pejoratively, she's cabaret actress, which gives her the power to work a crowd and respond and ad-lib, rather than speech marks straight actress who may or may not be able to do that.
That's true, actually. It's good that you mentioned the ad-lib aspect of the piece, because there is a section in the middle where a member of the audience gets chosen to come up and learn a society dance. And, based on what that audience member says, she's got to be able to respond to that and keep the pace of the thing going. It's a very phenetically paced
it's high energy,
piece.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It really is. But that didn't drop for a second. And actually, that moment of audience participation, I said in my review of the piece, really gave it an extra layer. And I don't know when you saw it, but the chap that went up on stage went down an absolute storm.
Well, there is always that great British thing about thank God it's them, isn't there? So, people are very happy to cheer on the poor mug who's been dragged up, I always think.
True, but Ashton herself dealt with it very well and kept referring back to Prince Zarb, I think he was called, on stage all the way throughout then, from that point onwards. Nice use of some well-known classical music.
Yes, I think we should discuss the musical aspects of it. The score is new lyrics to well-known music, isn't it?
Yes.
Some of which is classical, as you absolutely say.
That's right. One of my particular favourite pieces of classical music appeared right at the end, the Radetzky March.
Oh, really?
Which crops up very often on television. If listeners don't know the piece by the name, Radetzky March, they will definitely know it by the sound. And that again just maintains a sort of bouncy nature whilst also anchoring it in a certain time period as well. And you've got things like English Country Garden, isn't there? And very stereotypical pieces of music for the type of piece that it is.
Part of our folk heritage, actually, in that wider sense.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, oddly, I enjoyed it as a cabaret piece, and I didn't enjoy it as a musical. It's advertised as a musical, Jane Austen musical, and it isn't. I don't think. I think it's a very accomplished one-woman show. It's very funny, but because it was sort of new lyrics to old music and a solitary member of the cast, with the exception of the poor person dragged up, I didn't review it last year because, for exactly that reason, I enjoyed it, but I didn't feel it quite fell into the category of a musical, which it overtly declares itself to be. But which is not to take anything away from her, because she is a remarkable performer. Australian or New Zealand, I think, isn't she?
Yes, New Zealand, that's right. So a long way to come. But,
yes,
but
twice in 2 years, so she obviously enjoyed it.
At least. And, we were speaking about it a few days ago, and I think you said very aptly that it's got a bit of a cult following.
It has.
Actually, and
did it sell out? It was full
it was very full, yeah.
Jane Austen still sells.
That's it.
It's worth saying.
Yeah, it's true, and the ostentatious show is up again, isn't it, this year?
It is. Very high profile this year, getting stars aplenty. It's pretty much a constellation.
And that's just an improvised piece, isn't
it's
it?
It's an improvised Jane Austen play.
Novel,
or novel, as you quite rightly say. And although there are musical theatre people in it.
Okay.
Yes, because I've interviewed one of the cast when she appeared in Cole Porter's Jubilee a few years ago, and she's a great talent. So.
Yeah, so just to sort of wrap up this section, I guess it's well worth seeing, isn't it? It's
oh yes, absolutely.
It's
a piece of light relief.
Definitely light relief. There's joke after joke, which are good. They go down a storm, and if you are a Jane Austen fan, you'll enjoy it.
Talking of historic stories reworked, or at least, I mean, she's not a historic story, but she's plundering a period. I think I ought to just mention Adam and Eve and Steve.
Okay.
Which of course takes what some people would regard as the original story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. It's a Hollywood Fringe musical, so it's a festival piece again. I hadn't heard of it before here in Edinburgh, but as you can imagine, it's sort of a gay twist on the Adam and Eve story, but it's very, very playful. Once again, it's one of those productions here in Edinburgh which is a good professional piece with no missteps at all. And the conceit generally is that God has created Adam, hasn't yet created Eve. And the show is actually opened by the devil, who sings a song called It's All About Me. He says, it doesn't matter what this is called or what you see, it's all about me.
Always gets all the best songs.
Yes, actually, do you know, they do not use that phrase, and you think they should. But he actually opens with one of the catchiest numbers, and the chap playing the devil is very good. He's very charismatic. And he's a cheeky devil. He's not an evil devil, he's a cheeky devil. And actually it plays up that slightly quite forgotten thing about the fact that Lucifer was previously God's favourite and was cast out of heaven. And you can see him pining still to be recognised or remembered by God. So there's a little bit of look at me teenagerdom in this devil, if you like, even though he's a middle-aged actor who just does it so cheekily. He's also got that kind of I can give the audience a wink kind of a... So you find yourself so odd. You find yourself rooting for the devil. I mean, it's an odd thing. But anyway, before Eve is created, Adam has been promised a mate by God. God's going off and taking the rib. But the devil gets him first and creates Steve, who is the perfect gamer, if you like. And Adam thinks this is his partner because he was promised one and this is what turns up. And so they have... It's very non-sexual, by the way, as well. It's just that, they're both wandering around in loincloths. And I should say this, the actor who plays Adam is playing... If there are such things as stereotypes, he is playing Adam as a kind of lad. A very naive, charming lad. And the chap playing Steve is quite overtly gay. But they become busy mates, and then God turns up in voice only. Very beautiful voice. The man they've got to play God is the right man to play God, who gets very cross. And then Eve turns up, and then it's almost, who's Adam going to turn to? Because he knows there's Eve, but he's already got his new mate. So that's the story. There's lots of fun on the way. God does materialise in person halfway through the act to do a song and dance number with the devil. So you're getting the tone of the piece. And it does, of course, it all resolves the way you're expecting it to resolve. Although there's a very brief message where a slightly angry and lonely Steve, because he feels rejected, is told by God, but actually there is a place for gay men in his world. It's just not here in Eden. It's going to be a bit later down the line. So there's a slightly nice message in that kind of thing, or a charming message in that sense. But the score is the thing that surprised me most. It's a modern piece. And it's clearly contemporary. It's certainly got contemporary morals and mores in terms of its narrative. The score, however, is very evocative of the 1930s. I assume the writers, who I don't know, are fans of the Gershwin and the interwar period. It feels like a Porter, a Gershwin, a Rodgers and Hart, an Irving Berlin kind of musical more than it does a Sondheim. And it's actually rather lovely. That's not to say it doesn't, it moves along absolutely the slick modern lines of the 21st century. It just does it with a musical sensibility of the 30s, which is quite rare these days. So it's a beautiful, compact little gem, really. You can take it out of the box and have a lovely time with it, and then you put it away, but you'll still walk home with the devil's song.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. And, if only all cosmic affairs could be settled with a song and dance number, the world would be a better place, surely.
That's a philosophy I can get behind.
Well, if I may, perhaps talk about one more. This is one that I've seen. I don't believe you have, but it's one that I went along to with a sort of vested personal interest, as you'll see why very soon. But it was called "Trust Me, I'm a Drama Teacher."
Would you care to explain to the world, do you have an interest in that?
Well, in my regular life outside of Edinburgh, I work as a teacher, English mainly, but the themes are...
But drama is in there, isn't it?
There's a little bit of drama in there. And so I wanted to see this piece because it's, again, a one-man show.
Oh, is it?
Written and performed by a chap called Rick Wood, who works as a drama teacher. A fairly young guy as well, so it's, to some extent, the experiences of a new teacher in a school. And it's a very interesting piece in many ways. It's less a piece of typical musical theatre than it is a series of beat poems.
Oh, right.
Though with music underscoring everything.
So it's set poems almost.
It's
poems set to music.
Exactly, yeah. With a very strong rhythm.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether the performer himself has recorded the music, but someone has. And the technical element is you press the button at the start, and then you've got to keep up with it.
Yes, of course. That's the curse of non-live music, isn't it? There's no give.
No, and the way that the lyrics have been written give very little room for manoeuvre. So,
well, they're tight, rappy beat. Well,
that's right.
Beat poetry, isn't it?
Yeah, some very, very swift lyrics in there. So he does very well to keep up with all of those.
Dexterous.
Very dexterous, vocally dexterous. And I will say one of the more interesting things, just in relation to what we were saying about the Ivor Novello story, about how a large part of that audience was comprised of Novello fans, people that remembered him perhaps from the time that he was still alive and working.
A particular clientele almost, yes.
Absolutely. It was a very similar thing in the audience of Trust Me, I'm a Drama Teacher, just from overhearing a few of the conversations and speaking to Rick Wood afterwards. A large amount of audience members were teachers themselves, or recently retired teachers or current teachers, and that again is perfect. Actually, similar to title of show as well, isn't it? As much as you have people that know about what's being presented.
I suppose you're right. Yes, he's a specialised audience.
Yes, very much so.
Yes, gosh.
Similar to title of show, a lot of these very rapidly delivered jokes and one-liners and references to things such as Ofsted and performance-related pay and staff training. They might find a certain humour in an outsider, if I were to put it like that, but for someone that's in the cut and thrust of that work, if you like, it becomes very pertinent. Now, I was a little bit worried in the early phases that it was going to be just barrage after barrage of, surface level humour about teachers, about summer holidays, about that sort of thing.
Oh, we're scratching at the surface at a bit of a generic level, yeah.
That's right, but certainly in the second half, there is a bit more meat put on the bones of the thing, actually, and you get more into the details of the relationships that teachers can build with their students, and the best sort of main storyline in this piece centres around one particular student, based on real events, having spoken to the performer afterwards, but narrative-wise, given a certain fiction, and it's really quite hard-hitting. Despite all of the comedy, it does plunge into the quite difficult real lives that very many students do have, and which you sometimes as a teacher get a little bit of insight into.
Well, social work is part of teaching, is it?
Yeah, it very much is, and he does deal with that in a very sensitive way, actually, which is very impactful, and is a much needed part of this piece, and which elevates it beyond what I was fearing it was descending into, which was just look at me, I'm a drama teacher, it's all great, or it's all terrible, and a bottle of vodka after work, oh no, I've seen a student in the supermarket. But when you add this extra layer of depth, everything else falls into place, and you can forgive that, and you actually see the value, because you've got on the one hand, frothy, almost quasi-celebrity status that comes with being a teacher when you see a student outside of school, but then some real ethical, moral dilemmas about how you have to deal with certain situations. And so I think for an audience of teachers, they would enjoy it and again recognise many of the things that are presented. But I do also think that for anyone that isn't a teacher, it would be an interesting piece to see, to actually understand some of the aspects of the job that you wouldn't necessarily think about. And
it could actually be an education, is that what you're saying?
It could well be an education, but all respect to Rick Wood for actually having the bravery to present some quite difficult issues there.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. I mean, the point you've been making about is that those elements give it depth. And of course depth can only be delineated if you also know what the height is.
Yeah.
So you need to have the shallow in order to know where the depths are, in a way. So and it also sounds structurally really interesting. You called it sort of two halves. Did it have that sense to it, or was it just a development over the hour or whatever it was?
It's almost circular in a sense that the final song, I can call it that, the lyrics mirror the opening, and there is that line, "Trust me, I'm a drama teacher." However, because of what we've been through from the beginning to the end, that the nuance of "trust me"
I see what you mean.
becomes a lot more significant.
It's a weighted term afterwards, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's glib at the beginning because that's how the word "trust me, I'm a doctor" or "trust me, I'm a whatever it is" comes across, doesn't it? You know.
And even "trust me, I'm a drama teacher, not I'm a teacher." And sometimes the perception, perhaps in the general public, of what a drama teacher is the much hated phrase, "those who can do, those who can't teach," isn't it? And perhaps
dreadful cheek.
It is, and perhaps never more relevant than with a teacher of something like musical drama.
Sadly, yes.
Completely without merit.
But in the pecking order of society, that doesn't feel very high, does it?
No, that's right. And so at the beginning, the "trust me, I'm a drama teacher, I know what I'm doing, I can do this," it completely changes at the end, where the "trust me" becomes a much more genuine, look, I'm here, you can come to me.
See, I love that. I love that when a show has a title which has some meaning, and that meaning is subtly changed because of the narrative drive and whatever it is you've seen. I mean, to a degree, How to Win Against History, it's not quite the same thing at all, but the title, the meaning of the title is informed by the play, and you have a much better understanding of what the title means once you've seen the play. And it sounds exactly the same with "Trust Me" here.
That's it. So actually, I've enjoyed it more that I've thought about it in retrospect.
Oh, good. Well, that's also a show that you take home with you. Is also, that's a mark of a good show, isn't it? Well, Josh, I can't tell you how much I enjoy our conversations every year because they bring to the table some musicals I've not seen, but they also bring to the table some insights on musicals I have seen. So, forgive me, it's just a pleasure talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about and who thinks about what they've seen. And of course, you're just fun to talk to anyway, so thank you very much indeed for that. But Josh, good luck with what's left of your Fringe. Not much left of it, but I would strongly recommend our listeners to go and find Joshua Clark with an E on the Broadway Baby website to find out what you've been saying, because you've reviewed rather more than just musical theatre. If you want a good rounded mapping of the quality of shows across the board, then I think you might be the place to go to.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, and thank you once again for inviting me on to Musical Talk. It is always a particular highlight for me as well, and especially in the role of a reviewer, which can, to ham it up, become quite a lonely one, sitting at one's keyboard writing up things and go to see endless shows on one's own. It's equally nice to discuss shows with someone else. So
a bit of back and forth, isn't
absolutely.
it?
So thank you, and look forward to next year.
See you soon.
Musical Talk. Well, there we are. That was Josh Clark, and it's always a pleasure talking to him. It really is. He is a considered reviewer, and in Edinburgh there are many, many reviewers, but they aren't all good. If you'd like to read some of Josh's reviews, all you need to do is type into Google Broadway Baby and Joshua Clark with an E at the end, and hey presto, there you are. They are worth reading and add a bit more meat to the bone of the conversation we've had already. And remember, he doesn't just review musical theatre, so if you'd like a wider idea of some of the things that were available at this year's Festival Fringe in other genre, including drama and children's shows, you can. And for those of you who were wondering from way back at the beginning of the episode, I subsequently did do some research and discovered that the noun describing what you have if you are a marquis is marquisate. I was correct the first time. I should stop doubting myself. After all, I'm always right. And possibly just a bit smug. And to prove it, I now declare publicly that there's nothing more I can add to this episode to make it better, and therefore I'm going to stop it now. And the best way of stopping it, of course, is to say that word you're longing to hear. And here it is. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at musicaltalkthos. So, title of show, we think a very successful production of a very successful show, but such an unusual show. It's a little bit Marmitey, isn't it, in that sense?
Yes, I think so. And if I weren't leaving Edinburgh tomorrow, I would go back and see it again, and I'm sure it would be even better than it was the first time around.
Shinier.
Shinier.